In Soviet times, the Russian bioweapons program was about 10 times larger than the United States military and intelligence estimates. When the USSR ended, the program was reduced significantly, and experts from the US helped to transform facilities into legit civilian research facilities. However, the core of the Russian Biopreparat survived and was expanded again. Besides the obvious internal justifications for this, there is an even darker philosophy behind it. The three former Soviet military bioweapons facilities, Sergeyev Posad 6, formerly Zagorsk 6, Yekaterinburg 19, formerly Sverdlovsk 19, and the Kirov Institute remained just like in Soviet times. Inaccessible to foreigners, heavily guarded. Things began to change as the threat of terrorism increased, which became a serious problem in Russia due to the wars against Chechnya. In July 1999, an outbreak of Congo-Crimean hemorrhagic fever occurred in Oblevskaya in the Rostov region of southern Russia. Although the outbreak was not described as a bioterrorist attack, it nevertheless served to revitalize the old bioweapons program and give it a new mission. In 2000, Chechen separatists reportedly attempted to infiltrate Sergeyev Posad 6 to obtain pathogens, which may also have influenced Russian decision-makers at the time. The government issued 2 decrees in 1999 to protect the Russian people from man-made or natural biological threats, including by designating Sergeyev Posad 6 and the Volgograd Anti-Plague Institute as leading biological preparation facilities. These regulations also enabled both institutions to continue advanced dual-use research on dangerous pathogens, including by conducting aerosol experiments. In an interview with Krasnaya Zvezda, Gamaleya Institute director Alexander Ginsberg proudly stated that he had inherited a close cooperation with the military dating back to the Soviet biological weapons program. In 2004, the Russian newspaper Moskovsky Komsomolets proudly announced about Sergeyev Posad 6. According to some sources, all production facilities of the underground part of Zagorsk 6 are in perfect condition, including the production lines for the smallpox virus. We are ready for biological warfare. Well, it's not so perfect after all. Sergeyev Posad 6 has been struggling for several years with problems such as dilapidated buildings, lack of central heating, and lack of garbage collection. Sergeyev Posad 6 is not just a military biological facility, but also a closed city in the old Soviet style, in which 5,000 to 6,000 residents live. In 2018, a demonstration occurred after residents of Sergeyev Posad 6 were without hot water and heating for almost 2 weeks. One resident complained, "We have more rats than cats. This is not a city, but a kind of concentration camp." Yuri Bobilov, a key proponent of genetic weapons in Russia, painted a bleak picture of the world caught in a Malthusian trap in his 2006 book, The Genetic Bomb: Secret Scenarios of Bioterrorism. Since he described the world as heading toward ecological catastrophe anyways, he advocated the development and use of genetic weapons to wipe out most of humanity, leaving only about 1 billion people, the so-called Golden Billion. This term, Golden Billion, is widespread in post-Soviet Russia. Most of the time, the Russians frame this topic as them fighting some sort of conspiracy. But in Bobilov's book and subsequent articles, this term is turned upside down. He advocated the use of genetic weapons as the main weapon in genocidal wars around the world in order to reach the promised land of the Golden Billion. Not surprisingly, Bobilov's book is full of racist sentiments, admiration for Nazis, and respect for individual Nazi scientists, such as the famous zoologist Konrad Lorenz. In old age, Lorenz expressed himself as a civilizational, ecological social critic and became a leading figure of the Green Movement in Austria. In the 1950s, Lorenz was the only biologist in a group of developmental psychologists working on behalf of the World Health Organization as a study group on the psychobiological development of the child. They discussed the consequences of ethology for child psychology. In 1973, together with Karl von Frisch and Nikolaus Tinbergen, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine for discoveries on the organization and triggering of individual and social behavior patterns. Lorenz said about population development in 1988, "It turns out that ethical people don't have that many children, and the gangsters continue to reproduce indefinitely and carelessly. And humanity has done nothing sensible to combat overpopulation. You could therefore develop a certain sympathy for AIDS." Karl Ritter von Frisch, the co-Nobel Prize winner, was able to build a new zoological institute in Munich in 1931 and 1932 with the support of the Rockefeller Foundation. Representatives of the Rockefeller family were involved in the American biological weapons program. Bobylov, the Russian guy, had previously worked for various government agencies and was an employee of the powerful Military-Industrial Commission. He knew about the work led by Lieutenant General Valentin Evstigniev, the former head of the 15th Directorate of the Soviet General Staff, which was responsible for the Soviet bioweapons program. In 2012, Prime Minister Putin, shortly before returning to the presidency, wrote an essay on future military technologies, including genetic weapons. At a subsequent televised meeting with his ministers, Russian Defense Minister Anatoly Serdyukov promised to develop new weapons systems, including genetic weapons based on Putin's essay. This dark worldview could explain a series of government decrees in 2018 to 2020 aimed at strengthening the development of genetic technologies in Russia, a program that had a planned budget of more than $3.8 billion. The program plans to establish 3 genome centers and 65 laboratories and research centers while training around 3,000 people. The energy company Rosneft will help create a special center capable of decoding the genomes of 100,000 people living in Russia, mainly Rosneft employees and their family members. Russia has clearly adopted Western-style eugenics ideas. And the eugenics movement initially started with the European aristocracy, which considers itself to be the superior group, superior beings. The next step was experimentation in the United States. You can find a lot of good research in the book War Against the Weak, Eugenics in America's Campaign to Create a Master Race by Edwin Black. These upper-class families had the idea of identifying the lowest 10% of the population and then limit this segment of the population in terms of marrying and having babies. After handling these 10% of the population, the next step was intended to identify, again, the next lowest 10% of the population. But then this program was stopped in its form, and eugenics research was then hidden away in various fields of science, and it was not as explicit anymore. The Nazis had adopted these ideas in the most violent way possible. But none of these ideas were originally from the National Socialists. In fact, the Nazis never ever had an original thought. A big influence was Madison Grant. He graduated from Yale University and from Columbia Law School. He worked as a lawyer, but he was interested in the sciences. And he became a big fan of eugenics. His main works are The Passing of the Great Race and The Conquest of a Continent. Hitler himself sent a fan letter to Madison Grant. And Hitler called the book, The Passing of the Great Race, a sort of Bible. During the Vladimir Putin era, we saw a big resurgence of race ideology in Russia. Now, of course, they don't see it like the Americans or like the Germans or like the British aristocracy. The Russians view the Slavs as the leading race. And in their view, and they make a lot of weird historical arguments, white people are the enemy. This goes back hundreds and hundreds of years when the infamous Alexander Nevsky fought against these European knights. And ever since then, white people were the main enemy. Now, of course, in World War II, this idea became an extreme, but this was not where this idea ended. In our current time, white people, according to the Russians, they rule Britain and the United States, the main enemies, and therefore they also use the term Nazis for Brits and Americans. Fortunately, the historical National Socialists did not have a sophisticated large bioweapons program. Russia today now, of course, has a very, very vast and advanced program of that nature. And it's interesting, to say the least, to see this Russian character, Bobylov, adopting a Western-style green argument for eugenics. Now, on this YouTube channel, you can find my documentary on the secrets of British-controlled climate science. So the main institutions of climate science, the ones that really matter, are in the hands of Britain, especially the aristocracy, and also in the hands of old British networks in the United States, such as Skull and Bones. You've probably seen quotes from the late Prince Philip of the British royal family, quotes regarding nature, and he framed it once as putting himself into the position of an endangered species. How would that species think about humans? And he made that analogy: if he were to be reborn, wouldn't he be reborn as a deadly virus to fight back against humanity? In fact, you can find many high-ranking aristocrats thinking along the same lines. You can find many powerful members of the British Eugenics Society, later called Galton Institute. You had Baron John Keynes, the economist. You had David Coleman, professor of demography at the Department of Social Policy and Intervention, University of Oxford. Arthur Balfour, the Earl of Balfour, member of the Privy Council, member of the Royal Society, Deputy Lieutenant of the Crown. William Henry Beveridge, the first Baron Beveridge, a British economist and social reformer. Walter Russell Brain, the first Baron Brain, British neurologist and author of the standard work Brain's Diseases of the Nervous System. He's also a Fellow of the Royal Society. Sir Charles Galton Darwin, physicist, director of the National Physical Laboratory during the Second World War. Charles Davenport, director of the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in New York, where he started the Eugenics Record Office. Sir Francis Galton, the aforementioned Madison Grant. Thomas Horder, the first Baron Horder. He's an English doctor, and he was also a physician to the monarchs. David Starr Jordan, founding president of Stanford University. He was the head of the Committee on Eugenics of the American Breeders Association. And Sir Bernard Mallet studied in Oxford. He was a private secretary for Arthur Balfour. He was Registrar General and President of the Royal Statistical Society, leader of the World Population Conference of 1927. You can find information in previous videos on this channel about how infiltrated Britain truly is. Many of the greatest intelligence failures of recent history were caused by Britain. And most of the time, the United States had to deal with the consequences. So even Lord Louis Mountbatten was likely compromised by Russia. And this British infiltration that also extends to these old British networks in the United States, such as Skull and Bones.